You won't believe what happened when a father's heartfelt surprise visit to school picnic spot turned into a nightmare. He arrived at his daughter's school picnic, expecting to see her smile and laughter blend with the crowd, but instead, he witnessed a shocking scene. A young boy yanking his daughter by the hair, all because of the color of her skin. Stay tuned for a story of heartbreak, resilience, and a little girl's quiet but unbreakable courage. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. The morning sun shone brightly as Marcus stood in his living room, carefully wrapping a small handmade lunch. Today was a big day for his daughter, Jada, her first school picnic. It was a moment she had talked about for weeks, bursting with excitement at the thought of spending a day outdoors with classmates. Marcus, a single father, had seen her enthusiasm and wanted to make it special. So he made a plan, a surprise visit, his way of showing his support for her on this big day. He watched her that morning, smiling as she bounced on her toes, asking him to braid her hair just right. She was his world, and he felt a mix of pride and worry each time she stepped out. A little farther from his protective circle, she was one of only a few black children at her new school. And though Marcus had always taught her to stand tall, he knew her path wasn't always going to be easy. As he drove to the picnic spot, a few miles out at the school's chosen park, he felt a warmth in his chest. He had left work early, wrapping up calls faster than usual so he could arrive at the park before her lunch break. He imagined her face lighting up when she saw him there, a familiar figure in a sea of strangers. Today, he would stand back, let her enjoy her freedom with her friends, and maybe even witness her laugh and play, surrounded by new friends. He parked his car and walked to the open field where groups of parents and kids were gathered under a blue sky, scattered on colorful blankets and fold-up chairs. A few teachers walked around, keeping a watchful eye on clusters of children. Scanning the crowd, Marcus finally spotted Jada, her bright yellow dress making her easy to find. She was standing near a group of girls her age, clutching her lunch bag and smiling shyly, yet with excitement. He could tell she was holding back, maybe a bit nervous, but her wide eyes and tentative laugh told him she was genuinely happy to be there. Marcus kept his distance, letting her enjoy her moment. He stayed near the edge of the field, observing her, pride swelling in his heart as he watched her carefully approach a few classmates. She stood just a little apart from the group, an excited energy bubbling from her as she watched the other children, taking small steps to close the gap. That was when he noticed a group of boys approaching her. A boy, a little taller than the rest, stepped forward, his blonde hair catching the sunlight. Marcus felt a flicker of concern, but brushed it aside, thinking perhaps he was a friend coming over to say hello. Jada's eyes darted to the boy, her excitement dimming as she noticed him watching her. She shifted her weight, looking down for a moment before meeting his gaze, her body tense. Then, in an instant, the boy reached out, grabbed Jada by the hair, and yanked her back with a force that caused her to stumble. Marcus's heart stopped, his breath caught in his throat as he watched, frozen in shock, unable to process what he had just seen. It was as if time slowed down. He saw Jada's expression, the way her eyes widened with confusion and hurt, her hand flying up to try to free herself. Her small frame lurched backward as the boy pulled, his mouth twisted in a smirk. Around them, other kids watched, some giggling, others shifting uncomfortably but saying nothing. And then, standing just a few feet away, he saw her. Karen, the boy's mother, stood with arms crossed, her gaze fixated on Marcus rather than her son's actions. She wore a slight smile, her expression one of detached amusement, as if she saw no harm in what was unfolding. Marcus's heart began to pound, his feet suddenly moving him forward, instinct overriding the stunned paralysis that had held him back. As he reached Jada, she had pulled herself free, one hand clutching her scalp, her face twisted in pain. Marcus knelt down, gently taking her hand and pulling her into a protective embrace, his mind racing with anger, hurt, and confusion. "Let go of her!" he shouted, his voice sharp and filled with the father's quiet but fierce rage. He scanned the crowd, hoping for support, some sign that other parents would step in and back him up. But what he saw instead was disheartening. People averted their gazes, some shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his eyes as though they hadn't seen a thing. He felt a sense of isolation he hadn't expected, a suffocating helplessness that cut deep. It wasn't just about his daughter being hurt. It was about the silent judgment, the unspoken prejudice in the cold stares and averted eyes. No one would help him, and in that moment, he felt the weight of what it meant to be seen differently, all because of the color of his skin. Jada clung to him, and he could feel her small body trembling. Her wide eyes searched his face as if looking for reassurance. In that moment, he saw something shift in her gaze. A glimmer of resolve formed in her expression, a quiet determination to be stronger, to stand on her own if she had to. As he gently rubbed her back, Marcus heard her whisper, almost as if to herself, "I don't want to feel like this again, Daddy. I want to learn to protect myself. I'll never feel like this again." It broke his heart to hear her say it, to see that strength was already something she felt she had to build. She was just a child, yet here she was, already deciding to grow strong. Marcus held her close, looking back at the boy who had taunted her, and then to his mother, who still stood watching with her arms crossed, unmoved by what had happened. For a moment, Marcus thought of walking away, of taking Jada home and leaving this place. But the anger, the silent yet powerful indignation, urged him forward. He couldn't let this slide, not after seeing his daughter hurt and humiliated while everyone turned a blind eye. He reached for his phone, feeling the weight of his decision. He would call the police. This was more than a childish squabble. This was an attack fueled by prejudice, and if no one here would help him, he would find help elsewhere. His hand shook slightly as he dialed, knowing the potential repercussions, but feeling it was his only choice to protect Jada and ensure she was respected and safe. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding as the officers finally approached. The weight of his daughter's small hand in his made him feel grounded, assured that justice would soon be served. But the relief he felt was short-lived. One of the officers took a long, uninterested glance at the situation, his expression blank as he looked between Marcus, Karen, and the crowd. "Sir," the officer began in a detached tone, "it sounds like this was a simple misunderstanding. We can't get involved in every little disagreement between kids." Marcus felt his stomach drop, a chill spreading through him as he stared at the officer in disbelief. "Misunderstanding?" he echoed, his voice tinged with frustration. "My daughter was dragged by her hair, humiliated in front of everyone. How is that a misunderstanding?" Karen crossed her arms, her smirk deepening as she watched the exchange. "See?" she said, glancing smugly at the officer. "Just a little playground spat. There's no need to make this a bigger deal than it is." The other parents continued to look away, murmuring among themselves, unwilling to meet Marcus's eyes. Desperation clawed at him. He had done everything right. He had stayed calm. He had called for help. And yet, once again, he found himself alone. Then, just as Marcus felt his last shred of hope slipping away, a voice spoke up from the crowd. "Are you really going to let this slide?" It was a young woman with a phone held up, her camera trained on the scene. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with indignation as she focused on the officer and Karen. "This man's daughter was attacked, and you're just going to ignore it because she's black?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering to the phone in her hand. Marcus noticed the tension ripple through the crowd as more people turned to watch, drawn by the woman's defiant stance. "Excuse me, Mom," the officer said, his voice clipped. "Filming is not necessary. We are handling the situation." "Doesn't look like it," she shot back, her voice rising. "I'm filming this because people need to see what's really going on. This girl deserves justice, and her father deserves respect. We're not just going to stand by and watch this happen." The officer's face flushed, a hint of frustration breaking through his calm facade. He gestured for her to step back, but the woman held her ground, her phone still recording. A few others in the crowd, emboldened by her stance, took out their phones as well, their murmurs of agreement growing louder. Karen's smug expression faltered, her gaze darting between the cameras and the officer. She opened her mouth to protest, but the woman cut her off. "This isn't just kids being kids," she said, her voice strong and clear. "You saw what happened, and so did everyone else here. That girl was targeted. Are we really going to act like it's nothing?" The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, clearly feeling the pressure of the crowd's shifting support. He cleared his throat, adjusting his stance. "All right, Mom," he said to Marcus, his tone more cautious now. "We'll take statements from everyone involved and file a report." For the first time, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. He met the woman's gaze, his eyes filled with gratitude. She gave him a small nod, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't alone. But the tension lingered, heavy in the air, as the officers finally began questioning Karen and Bradley. The crowd watched closely, phones still recording, a silent demand for accountability and justice. Jada squeezed her father's hand, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She seemed to understand, in her own way, that this moment was more than just about what had happened to her. It was about standing up, even when it felt like the world was against you. As Marcus held her close, he whispered, "We're going to be okay, Jada. We're stronger than this." And with the support of those who had finally stepped forward, he felt the strength to see it through. As the officers led Bradley away to talk privately, Marcus felt the tension finally easing, a small glimmer of justice starting to unfold. But as he knelt beside Jada to comfort her, he could see something deeper in her eyes. A confusion, a question that weighed heavy on her young heart. She looked up at him, then at the crowd that had slowly come to their side, her innocent eyes searching for answers that shouldn't have to be asked. A hush fell over the crowd as Jada took a shaky breath, her voice soft but strong, carrying across the quieted field. "Daddy, how many times do we have to go through this?" Her gaze moved to the people watching, her words piercing the silence. "How many times does this have to happen? And why?" Her question hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, echoing in the hearts of everyone around them. Parents shifted, their faces touched with discomfort, empathy, and quiet understanding. For a moment, Marcus didn't know what to say. The weight of the answer was too heavy, the truth too painful to put into words. He opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the right words, feeling the ache of a father who wanted nothing more than to protect his daughter from a world that sometimes seemed determined to test her. Jada turned her attention toward Bradley, who glanced back, his smug expression faltering under her steady gaze. Her small frame held a fierce determination as she looked at him, her voice trembling but resolute. She was done being silent. "From now on," she said, her voice stronger than before, "I'll make myself strong enough to answer this kind of behavior. I'll be ready next time so that I never have to feel this way again." Her words were filled with a maturity far beyond her years, a solemn oath echoing from a place deep within her. She held Bradley's gaze, her eyes blazing with a resolve he hadn't seen before. He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling under the intensity of her stare. It was as if, in that single moment, the power had shifted, and Jada's strength shone brighter than any words of hatred or mockery he could have thrown at her. The crowd watched in silent awe, the weight of her vow pressing on them all. Marcus felt his chest swell with pride and a touch of sadness, his heart breaking and healing all at once as he saw the girl before him, a girl who had been tested and had found her own strength, her own voice. With her hand still firmly in his, He whispered, "You're already stronger than you know, Jada, and I'll be here every step of the way." The woman who had been recording wiped a tear from her eye, her voice breaking the silence. "Jada," she said gently, her voice filled with admiration, "you're brave beyond your years, and just know there are people here who will stand with you." The murmurs of agreement, soft but certain, rippled through the crowd. One by one, others nodded, a shared promise to do better, to protect and stand up, so that no one, especially not a child, would have to face such pain alone. For the first time, Jada felt the warmth of support around her, a powerful shield that extended beyond her father's protective arms. She looked up at him, her small hand tightening around his, and nodded. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but with her father by her side and a community awakened to the strength of a young girl's vow, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the crowd watched Jada with silent admiration, the officers returned. Their expressions shifted from indifference to a quiet respect. One of them approached Marcus, clearing his throat before speaking. "Sir, we'll be filing a report on the incident. Rest assured, we're committed to ensuring this doesn't happen again." Marcus gave a slow nod, his grip on Jada's hand firm but gentle. For him, the fight for justice had always been about more than one incident. It was about the dignity his daughter deserved, a dignity he had vowed to protect. Today, he saw that she was beginning to find that strength within herself, and the pride in his heart was undeniable. Karen and Bradley were escorted away by the officers, a small crowd still watching as they left. Karen's face was tight with anger, but Bradley glanced back one last time, his usual swagger absent. This time, he seemed to register the look in Jada's eyes, a look that told him she was no longer the girl he had tried to push down. She stood tall, her face set with quiet resilience, her gaze unwavering as she met his eyes. She was no longer a victim. She was stronger now, and they both knew it. The woman who had recorded everything approached Marcus and Jada, her face filled with empathy and admiration. She looked at Jada, her voice soft but earnest. "Jada, you have more courage than people twice your age. Never let anyone take that from you." Jada's face softened, her resolve tempered by a shy smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, but carrying a vulnerability that tugged at the hearts of those around her. Parents who had once looked away now stood near her, some reaching out to offer a quiet word of encouragement or a gentle smile. It was as if Jada's bravery had opened their eyes, reminding them of the strength it took to stand alone and the importance of standing together. One of the teachers, who had been on the sidelines earlier, stepped forward, remorse shadowing his face. He knelt to Jada's level, his voice heavy with sincerity. "I'm sorry, Jada. I should have done more. I want you to know that I'll be making sure our school becomes a place where every child feels safe and respected." He looked to Marcus, adding, "And you have my word on that." Marcus nodded, his expression grateful but cautious. The journey wasn't over. He knew that. But he felt the tide turning, a community stirred by the strength of one small girl who had spoken up, undeterred by the silence that had once surrounded her. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus and Jada turned to leave. The young woman with the camera gave them a final nod, her eyes filled with an unspoken promise to stand up and speak out wherever she could. And in her eyes, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Hope, a belief that Jada's courage had sparked something larger than any of them could have foreseen. In the quiet walk back to their car, Marcus and Jada said little. But as they reached the car, Jada turned to him, her eyes still bright with determination. "Daddy," she said, her voice filled with a newfound clarity, "can I start martial arts? I want to learn how to be strong, not just in here." She placed a hand over her heart. "But out here too." She held out her arms, as if reaching towards something larger than herself. Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and love, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Jada, I think that's a wonderful idea." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You're already strong, but I'll be right there with you every step of the way." As they climbed into the car, Jada leaned back, a small but determined smile on her face. She wasn't just going home. She was heading toward a new beginning, one where she would take control of her own strength, her own voice. The ride home was quiet, filled with the weight of the day's events, but for Marcus and Jada, it was also filled with something more powerful than words. A quiet promise, a shared strength. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, guided by the courage that had carried them through this day. And as they reached their front door, Marcus took one last look at his daughter, a young girl who had faced down prejudice with a strength that would inspire many. He knew that while the world might not change overnight, his daughter had changed. She had found her voice, her power, and a resilience that would carry her forward no matter what came next. Together, they stepped into their home, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that they were not alone and that their strength, their love, and their resolve was stronger than any challenge life could throw their way.